In the almighty name of Jesus. Hallelujah!
And that's what we see on the shroud. So when the image appears darker, you have many more of these microfibers appear to be affected with, and yet when it appears lighter, you just have fewer microfibers. And so what this means is not. So when we say lighter and darker, it's not because there's a less or more of any substance. And so this is really intriguing, and this discovery of this three-dimensional nature of the shroud was really what propelled the scientists to go study it in 1978, because they said, well, this is really weird. How is this even possible? And so it is a fabulous attribute. So
yeah, absolutely extraordinary. The more we study the evidence on the shroud, the more this theory that some medieval genius created it becomes just totally absurd. I mean, if we could collect and gather the brightest minds in science today, all the modern day Da Vinci's and Einsteins, get them all in one room and tell them to create some sort of image using advanced technology that would only be available, and wouldn't even be available until like 500 years from now. I mean, how would you even begin to embark on such a task, such an assignment, just to put things in proper perspective here? This has got to be the most analyzed, image in the world. And as you so eloquently stated earlier, I mean, it shows the torture of 120 scourge marks on the body, the front bear consistent with that Roman, whip that they have with the metal bits at the end, and just absolutely rip the flesh. And you can clearly see the scars and the pierce, in the body here, the puncture wounds from the crown, the thorns on his head, and even the plucked out beard. I've heard you spoke quite a lot about that in the past, and I mean this is an amazing recording of the humiliation that the Lord endured by the Romans. They punched him in the face. We see evidence of the swollen cheekbones on the shroud. Even the dirt particles from falling, when he was carrying his own cross. It shows this excruciating agony that he suffered, the absolute, horror of the cross, and even the spirit on the side. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit more on that. Validating that they didn't have to break his legs, that speed up the dying process. I mean, all this stuff is recorded there, and how extraordinary is this?
No, it's wonderfully extraordinary. One of the things that does get some people confused is Jewish burial practices, and everything seems to conform with Jewish burial practices that were practiced in and around the first century. And in fact, even the use of a single linen shroud. Now, someone who died by normal death would probably be given 3 articles of grave clothes. They would be, first of all, the body would be washed. They would be given a tunic, which kind of goes from the neck down to the ankles, no sleeves or pockets. Then there would be another cloth over the face, usually the Jewish talit or the actual prayer cloth, especially in the case of a man. And then a third and final cloth, which would be a linen shroud wrapping the whole package. But in the case of the Shroud of Turin, we don't see a tunic, and we don't see the Jewish talit. We just see a single burial shroud. Now, why is that? Because in the event of violent death, the body is not washed because life is in the blood, and so therefore they just don't wash the body if it's in the event of violent death, and you would only be given a single linen shroud. So again, the Shroud of Turin seems to conform with Jewish burial practices circa 1st century of a man who died by violent death. Now, I've been to exhibits where they show Jewish people that have died in and around the first temple period, which is around 600 BC. And in those mummies, if you will, they do seem to be wrapped with strips of linen. But that's not how they buried their dead. By the time the second temple period came along, again, 6 or 7 centuries later, around the first century. So there is that confusion about being, the whole strips of linen thing that you see in the Gospel of John. He was not wound with strips of linen like some kind of mummy. That's not how the Jews did it. In fact, we've uncovered burial shrouds from Masada. They're not wrapped with strips of linen. It's the strips would probably be strips of linen that were used to tie the wrist, tie the ankle, tie the chin up around over the head, and then maybe even additional strips around the outside of the shroud, perhaps, to bind the cloth to the body. But certainly, by the time the first century, there is no winding of the body with any kind of strips. Just want to clear that up because that's often I get that a lot in say lectures, and where it says, well, what about in John 19:40 where it says he was bound with strips? Say that proves it. He was wrapped like a mummy. Well, he wasn't because the other 3 Gospels only mention a linen shroud. They don't mention strips. Only John mentions strips. So there has to be some way to reconcile all this.
Absolutely. They needed something to tie the shroud together so it didn't come off. So
Right.
It makes total sense, and I'm glad you addressed it. I think the evidence just recorded supernaturally on the shroud, obviously, so the world might believe, and in believing, taking into consideration all the other supernatural signs and wonders and healing miracles and testimonies that continue to happen now because of Jesus and Yeshua. The Holy Spirit came to baptize and empower his true disciples in every preceding generation, which we see in John 14:12. This and greater things shall you do. So I think that's really another perspective we need to take into consideration here. That something caused them to believe. Maybe we could touch a bit on, besides the fact we got all these confirmations of herbs and microscopic grains of pollen and that only found in that origin of Israel. And I know
there are pollen that have been removed from the shroud that are from plants that are unique to Israel, and it's several different pollen strains, and this was confirmed by Avinoam Danin, who is the leading botanist in Israel with the Hebrew University. He's written 7 books on the flora or flowers of Palestine, and his last book, his 8th book, was entitled The Botany of the Shroud. Mm-hmm. And so not only does he look at actual pollen, but he also looks at what appears to be what we call off-body. In other words, there are flower images on the shroud, and I don't know why they're there. Perhaps because the flowers have their own natural coronal discharge or something, but there's clear flower images on there, and he can identify them, and there's a good number of them that are from plants that only grow in Israel, and he's convinced, and he's not even a Christian, but he tell you that he's convinced based on the botanical evidence that the shroud originated within a 20-kilometer radius of Jerusalem. And so it was there at some point. Now, they've also extracted from the shroud, they found particles of calcite. And specifically, they call it travertine, aragonite, limestone, but calcite is the common ingredient in road dirt. And they detected these particles of calcite in only 2 locations, on the feet and on the knees, and nowhere else. And it's like, well, what would you expect from someone who walked in sandals and fell under the weight of the cross? And so In 1986, a couple of researchers went back to Israel, and they took soil samples from 9 different locations around the country, and the only sample that had the same chemical signature as the calcite that was removed from the shroud was taken from the Damascus Gate. It's like, well, can you get any more specific? I mean, it's pretty incredible, really, when you think about it.
Oh, absolutely. While we're here, do you want to talk a little bit about the coins that were found, with Pontius Pilate at AD 30, 31? I mean, these are extremely rare coins.
Well, there appear to be objects placed over the eyes, and they could be buttons, they could be coins. This was sometimes used as a Jewish burial tradition. We have found in excavations, we've found skulls with coins in the back of the skull, where they obviously started off on the eyes, and so there was some speculation as to whether these could be coins. Now, the problem with this information is that it doesn't show up under all photography. So, for instance, some people can think that they can discern some markings in the Henri photos that were taken in 1931, but it doesn't show up under the photos taken by Barry Schwartz in '78. So the question is it there or is it not there? And but if it is there, it'd be pretty cool, because it appears that in some photography you can make out a pattern of letters spelled out in UCAI, and of course, we get our alphabet from the Roman alphabet, so they use the same alphabet as we do, and it is a portion of the inscription that reads Tiberius Caesar, and there is this Roman lepton as a kind of looks like a shepherd's crook, if you will, as kind of a that pattern seems to be over the right eye. Now, again, I don't hang my hat on that because it doesn't show up under all photography, but it is pretty intriguing. If we could ever get to the point where we could definitively show that it really is there, and so
it's interesting too. From what I've recall studying about it, that it basically has kind of like a ladle with a long handle, image on that coin, which was poured on the head of the sacrificial victims, like a drink poured out, an offering to deity, and that ziplum was also the sign of the Roman priesthood. One of the signatures of the College of Pontiffs. So that it's all intriguing. There was some sort of occultic connection there, possibly we're looking at.
Yeah, I mean, maybe now with high-def photography and all the stuff that we have now, maybe we can get a better, shot of that area and really come to a determination on it. So, I wanted to address this with you because this is you had mentioned it, and I always tell this in my lectures. I tell people this, and here's the clear contrast: is this. Either the Shroud of Turin is the authentic burial shroud of Jesus, or it's not. And if it's not, then it must be the work of an artist. And if that's the case, then there must be some kind of artistic substances on the cloth, some kind of clear process that was used to accomplish it. And yet, we find no evidence of that. And so remember, if it's not authentic, then it must be the work of an artist. And this is that I say that because one of the most another intriguing aspect, and there's hundreds of them, is the actual manufacture of the linen itself.